What's up, Simon 3D here. That's pretty lame. Super Simon 3D here. Today I'm gonna show you how to create a simple in Blender. Pretty cool, right? I agree. But as we all know, not a single project was ever achieved without making a solid plan first. So I went to Pinterest, which is basically a Google Images, but better. And I found this. Props to the artist. Now I don't want to recreate it one-to-one, there is already AI for that stuff, but I want to keep it in mind as sort of a guide of what I'm going for. So first let's identify what we need this to have. We need the root and the end to be this sort of ball shape, and also a smooth cylinder in between. Hopefully my movement here is gonna match whatever I'm gonna put in edit later, otherwise it's gonna be awkward. Well, other than that, we also want those spiky things that will go in the direction of the beam. And well, this already sounds like a plan to me. So let's go and open up the best 3D software in the universe, not even debatable. Before we start, very important, make sure to delete the default cube and everything else as soon as the Blender boots up, and we're good to go. Don't ask me why, I don't make the rules here. Just make sure to do it. Trust me. And now we can go and add mesh UV sphere. That's gonna be the first ball, the starting ball of our... Now let's go to edit mode and select maybe this many faces. It really depends on you, how thick you want the beam to be. And after those faces selected, extrude it and then just delete those faces. Now let's enable snapping to vertices. Make sure it's with closest. Then go up here and check origins. So we are only moving the pivot of the Kamehameha. Then move it on the Z-axis all the way here. And now let's add a mirror modifier, so we can mirror it on the Z-axis, not X-axis. Now let's go ahead and add another modifier, this time a subdivision surface, so that we have a lot more geometry to work with, which is gonna be super useful with the displays later. Just don't go too crazy, your PC is gonna explode, trust me. Maybe 3? 3 sounds like a reasonable number. And then right-click, shade smooth. Boom! We have our mesh completed. Now another modifier is gonna be the displays. And here let's click new to add a new texture, go to the textures tab, change it from image or movie to clouds. Very simple stuff so far. And you can see that we have this nice distortion going all over the place. So not perfect, but we'll take care of it. Now in order to get rid of this distortion here on the beam where we of course don't want it, we need to go to this green triangle tab thingy here, vertex groups, that's what we are looking for. Let's go to the edit mode of our mesh, vertex, and then only select these balls at the end, and maybe minus this last row of vertices here. And then click plus here to create a new vertex group. Now, as you see, it didn't really change anything, because we need to go to the modifiers tab, and in the displays modifier, specify that the vertex group we want to displace is the balls distortion. If nothing works, just like in my case, go back there, make sure that this group is selected, and in the edit mode, when you have all those vertices selected, click assign. Few more times, just to make sure. And now when you exit the edit mode, it should work perfectly. First crisis averted, I guess. Now let's actually pull up the reference that we are looking for. So add a image reference, and as you can see, currently the distortion distorts all the vertices in the normal direction, so it makes it look like some really weird broccoli. But what we are looking for is for those distortion to basically follow the direction of the beam of the Kamehameha. So let's take it out of the way. Create an empty object, can be cube maybe. Just make sure that it's bigger than this Kamehameha so that it's not getting lost inside the mesh, because we will need it. Then we are going back to our Kamehameha modifiers tab. We add another modifier, and this time it's a normal edit, because the spikes are now going into the normal direction, so we need to change the normal direction. We need to pull it up before the displacement, and here we see first we have an error, enable auto smooth in object data properties. So as the error says, object data properties is this funky little triangle here. Then we open normals and enable auto smooth. Let's also crank it up all the way to 180. Doesn't really matter, but I like to keep it as high as possible to make sure that everything is sort of smoothed out. At least for this project, it will make sense. Then back to the modifiers tab, and the target is gonna be the empty that we created. So balls distortion empty. As you can see, we already see something you could call glitching or like artifacts. because now the normals of this object is dependent on the normals of this empty. So we go back, we open this mix tab and change the mix mode from copy to subtract. And the last thing to change is in the displace modifier, change the direction from normal to custom normal, the one that we just created. And voila. Now we have the beam going from down up there, so the spikes are sort of, you can see what it's doing. I mean, I don't have to explain you what's on the screen, I guess. But let's also maybe select everything and rotate it by 90 degrees, since it's Kamehameha. We can play it horizontally, which I think is gonna be better. Now, if you want this to be more spiky, just take bigger area or something, you can always play with the strength here and the mid-level. You see, you can like fix those backfiring thing if you put the mid-level a bit higher. So yeah, feel free to figure it out on your own. What you can also do to help this a little bit, if like this end annoys you, is we can go back to our vertex groups. Or you know what, actually let's do another technique. Instead of manipulating vertices, we can just go to the vertex weight paint. And here you see everything that's red is the vertices that's gonna be affected by the displacement. But we can simply use this brush and just paint with weight 0 wherever we don't want those vertices to affect it. So something like here on this back of the ball. So it's gonna have like this flat beginning and only be spiking forward. Same we can do to this one, because right now you can see that there is some glitching happening, but it's very easy fix. So if you don't want to manipulate each vertex separately, you can just do it, you know, artistically using this weight paint. When you're satisfied, you just simply go back to the solid mode, and you're good to go. Now, one thing is we have those spikes, but another thing is when we play the animation, you can see that nothing's really happening. And I mean, if you watch the anime, you know that the spikes are supposed to, you know, move, its power, its beam. We need some action, right? So let's animate this, and for this we will need another empty, maybe plain axis, it doesn't really matter. You can position it maybe above the mesh so that we know what it corresponds to, and this one, let's name it spikes scroll, because it will scroll through the texture that displaces the spikes. Very good name. Now, in the displacement modifier, the coordinates are now set to local, so we need to change it to object. And this object is gonna be nothing other than the spike scroll itself that we just created. And now, when you simply move the spike scroll, you can see it affects the spikes. It's best if you keep it lined up with the effect itself, so that it moves along the same axis, and then you see it sort of looks like it's just flowing through. So we can do just that. So let's move it here with the starting position and the time on the first frame. Let's click I and add a keyframe location. Let's move the timeline by, let's say, 20 frames. Move it a little bit, and again, I location. And now, very important thing, we just hover over the timeline, click T, set the interpolation to linear, so we have the constant movement. And the next thing, Shift E, and we click linear extrapolation. So based on those two keyframes, it's gonna move further throughout the timeline to whatever length of your animation is right now. So for example, if I click play, I can see that even though I have keyframes here, it moves past it in the same speed that it did here. My FPS is now at 11 frames, so I will probably reduce the subdivision to 2 to, you know, not burn down the house. And you can see it's scrolling. If you want it to scroll, I don't know, slower or faster, you just move the second keyframe. The further it is, the slower it moves. The closer it is, the faster it moves. It's that simple. It just works. Done. Next, we have the Kamehameha, we have spikes, we have the mesh. Next thing we need is a material. We need this to look like Kamehameha. So let's open a new tab, and this one is gonna be a shader editor. With the mesh selected, click new, and let's delete the principled BSDF and add a emission shader. Now we can plug that right in, make sure that we are in the rendered preview. And before we start anything, I just want to point out a very important thing. If we work with stylized stuff and it's something that's called energy beam, then the first thing that you should do before you start anything with the material is go to the render settings, open bloom, make sure it's ticked, and crank up the intensity all the way up. 0.1, I know, doesn't sound great, just make sure it's there. Because now when we increase this emission strength, let's say to 50, we actually have something that looks like a beam energy sort of thing, perfectly suited for the Kamehameha. So let's lower it down to 5 because we're not amateurs, maybe 2. And since we have like this nice spiky geometry, we probably want to take advantage of that. So one way to do that is get a layer weight node and then connect it to a color ramp using the facing output. Now this color ramp can go directly into the emission, and as you can see we have a nice shading of the edges of our spikes. We can emphasize it even more by bringing those values closer together, and as I said, I like the blue sort of effect, so my color scheme is also gonna be like that. When it's moving, it looks, yeah, I think looks pretty dope. Now for the beam, because right now, as you can see, this layer weight facing doesn't give us much information here, because I mean the mesh is just a simple tube, so we cannot expect too much. We can add a little bit of that energy flow looking thing using a noise texture node, which we will connect using texture coordinates object to mapping and mapping to noise texture. Now if we preview this, you can see that it's this cloudy thing, but we can easily make it look like, you know, beam energy thing flowing. But for that we will need a vector math, plug it right here in between and change it from add to multiply. Now make sure all the values are set to 1 and then change only the z-axis to some very small value so it appears stretched like that. Now please beware, this whether it's z-axis or x or y, it may vary for you because it's the local axis of the thing that we created, and because we created it in the upright position, as you can see, we are manipulating the z value. But if you started doing it horizontally, it's probably gonna be different. Just try it out, make sure what works. No need to panic in the comments yet, you know. Now since we already have it, we can also make it move, and that's why we have this mapping node right here. So let's add a value node and also a math node. Change the math node to divide, connect it like so, and then move it here. We will need also a combine XYZ node. And then the result of the divide goes into the, in my case again, z value, for you may be different. And then this one goes into location. Now what will happen is we will have this value changing, and as you can see, we will see the energy flowing. So in order to change it every single frame of the animation, simply type in #frame, and that should do the trick. Now when we play, you can see that it's moving. If you want it to go slower, you just increase this value. As you can see, with like 10, it moves very, very slowly already. But I will keep it as something maybe 0.5, so that it sort of corresponds to the speed of the spikes. Now, it looks great, but first of all, it's moving in the wrong direction. I want to reverse it. So in this value, before the frame, I just put minus. Boom, goes the other direction. Second thing, I don't really want it to be inside the starting ball, because I want this energy beam effect start maybe somewhere here. So we need to do a little bit of masking for that. So first of all, let's move this graph a little bit so that it's not so messy. And now we will need another node coming from object, and that is gradient texture. Let's set it to spherical, and if you preview this, you can see that it sort of creates a sphere starting from the pivot position. So because I wanted this mask to be here, again, options, we are checking origins, and we're moving the pivot point somewhere here, somewhere in the middle of this ball. Make sure to uncheck the origins. And now in order to make this sphere bigger, because as you can see, it kind of dies down in there, let's copy this vector math and plug it in here, change it to scale, and then decrease the scale until it encompasses all of the spikes. Now we want to refine this mask a little bit, and for that we will need a math node, change it to multiply, and so as we multiply it, we also want to clamp it maybe, so that we make sure that these values are 1 and these are 0. We can also add another one, power, to sort of smooth out the transition, and maybe the endings are okay, I don't know, well, we'll see later. And the last node is again a math node, because now we need to combine it with this noise texture. And what we want is to subtract this mask from the noise texture. Sorry, the other way around, like that. So yeah, those endings, you can always adjust it by increasing the multiply, and we can decrease the power a little bit to sort of smoothen the transition, something like this. And now on top of this, we want our original mask, and let's mix it in a way that we can reuse this color ramp later. So with this layer weight, we can copy multiply and power from here and connect it like so that now let's adjust this thing. Maybe bring the multiply to something like 1.6. Increase the power, so we have stronger transition. And now we want this to be added to the result that we got here. So we simply add those two things together, make sure that the clamp is selected so that the values are not gonna exceed 1. And then this add goes directly into the color ramp. And if you have this sort of harsh transition in between those two, you can simply go back to the gradient texture and change the spherical into quadratic sphere, which is gonna give you much softer result right here. Then we can also play with this multiply a little bit, and that should do the trick. Now, because we are using this layer weight node, you can see that this beam and like how it looks like depends highly on two things. One is the position of the camera, and two is the position of this empty. So it's actually nice if we can put it somewhere. So I sort of prefer when it's closer, because not only the spikes then go more aggressively towards, but also we have this sort of convergence point closer to the beginning. Now let's go back to the emission and connect this one to the output, so we have this nice glowy thing. And you can see we can increase the strength and then everything sort of glows more or less the same. But a neat trick is we can also go to the color ramp and choose, let's say, this bright color stop, go into the color options and change the value here by manually typing in something like 5. And then what happens is not the whole mesh is just emitting more light, but only the areas that are of this color. So you sort of have like this local emission control. I'll have it as something like this, and then the uniform is at 2. So we have this really bright thing. And in the render preview, you can also play with like the different values here. I'm gonna let you figure it out on your own. Let's move on. Now when it comes to appearance and disappearance of this, there is probably plenty of way of doing this, but I will show you just one, which is not perfect, but worked for my example. If you can come up with something better, then let me know in the comments. I would love to explore that a bit deeper as well. So we have this model selected, and then we go back to this funny triangle thing, and here we have shape keys. So we simply click plus to add a shape key. The first one is always going to be basis, which is what we want, the original. And what we want is we want to create another shape key. So we click plus again, and with the shape key selected, we crank up the value all the way to 1, then click tab to go to the edit mode. We select all the vertices, and then we go and select this one in the back again. So we deselect it as selected again. We do this because we want to make sure that it's, you see, white as opposed to orange as everything else. So this is the active element. And now we go up here and we make sure that we have this set to active element. Very important. Because right now we're gonna click S to scale, and then click 0 to scale to 0, and then click enter. Confirm. So now our Kamehameha is all in this one small point in here. We go out of the edit mode, and now we have this key one selected, value of 1, but as we bring the value down, our Kamehameha is gonna come back to the original shape. So it's as simple as that. Nothing, something, nothing, something. You can see that even with nothing, we still have something, and that is because the modifier displace is doing it for us. So if you're planning to do some animation with this value from disappearing to appearing, make sure that when it's in the disappearing stage, you also keyframe the displace strength to 0 so that we don't have any artifacts left on the screen. And that is it for the simple Kamehameha tutorial. If you want this exact scene that I ended up with on the screen behind me, then you can check my Gumroad. I will probably post it there. Other than that, I hope you learned something, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye bye!